Hi, friends. In our sermonic exploration of Mark, we have taken a major turn in the narrative, a turn from the regions around the Galilee to Jerusalem, and the journey that began last week, which will eventuate this week in Jesus' entry into Jerusalem. And I pointed out to you last week in the sermon that all along that couple of chapters that we were following in the text in the last sermon, Mark continued to bring up this theme of the way. And it comes through in the translation in a lot of other ways as well. The way, the journey, the road, the path, etc. We saw it, I think, probably at least 8 times in last week's text, and we'll continue to see it come up this week as Jesus makes his way literally into the city of Jerusalem. Now, what I want to help you think about a bit this week is how Mark is using the way, the journey, the path, the road, not only literally in the topographical, geographical sense of Jesus' journeying with the disciples around physical space, around the land, but also how Mark is using the way as a metaphor for discipleship. We saw it really clearly last week in the story of Bartimaeus, where when they come upon this blind man begging and calling out for Jesus, he was sitting beside the road, beside the way. And then in the end of the story, after he is healed and Jesus calls him to come along with him, he goes with Jesus on the way. I mean, it's a both literal geographical usage of that image, but also a metaphor for Bartimaeus joining the way of Jesus, which is leading, as Jesus said 3 times really clearly last week, to suffering and death. And the disciples still haven't quite gotten that. But as Elizabeth Malbin pointed out to us in some of her work on the topography and geography of Mark and the use of space and land and its mythic meaning, the way is not a place in Mark. The way is a mediation between spaces, a journey between places, and it doesn't have a static, fixed being to it in Mark's gospel. It has a dynamic movement to it in Mark's gospel. So this is how Mark is more subtly portraying the life of discipleship as a journey. And we kind of use that language a bit flippantly and colloquially in our own talk about our journeys, our life journeys, our spiritual journeys, etc. But I want to invite you to reflect on that image, the image of the journey or the way or the road or the path as Mark is using it, as a metaphor for understanding something about your own life of discipleship, your own life of following Jesus. What ways have you seen Mark portray the way, the journey, that resonate with your own sense of journeying alongside or with Jesus? In some instances in Mark's gospel, Jesus is very clearly leading the way. Last week we saw Jesus tell Peter, "Get behind me, get back behind me, Peter. I'm leading the way." In other instances in Mark's gospel, we see Jesus send the disciples on ahead of him. He told them to get into the boat and go across and wait for him on the other side. And they did so, and that's when they got caught in a horrific storm that threatened their lives. And then they see Jesus come walking on the water, intending to pass them by, but they call out to him for help. And this week we'll see in the sermon, again, Jesus sending a couple of disciples ahead of him on the way to prepare something for him. All of these, Jesus sending you ahead in some uncharted way across the chaos of the seas where you feel alone, and then suddenly the presence of the divine comes with you, alongside you. You getting ahead of the way, trying to lead the journey, as Peter was doing when he rebuked Jesus for telling the disciples what was coming on the way. And Jesus said, "Get back behind me, Peter." Or this sort of invitation to journey alongside, to come to an understanding of the way of discipleship gradually, even when you really aren't getting it from time to time. Or this command that we'll see from Jesus this week for the disciples to go ahead of him to do something that he needs done, which makes no sense whatsoever, but they go and they do it. And what happens from that is pretty remarkable. So reflect on this week. How has your life of discipleship, of following Jesus, been marked by this dynamic movement that Mark is trying to help his readers from the first century and the 21st century see as the way of discipleship, the journey with Jesus?